All right. We're going to read a couple of interesting stories, a few actually. The parable of the 10 bridesmaids, the parable of the 3 servants, and the one about the goats and the sheep that I usually refer to. Now, I'll give you a little spoiler about the parable of the 10 bridesmaids. This story of the 10 bridesmaids teaches that every person is responsible for his or her own spiritual condition. Okay? Every person, each and every person is responsible for his or her own spiritual condition. Let's start this. All right. Then the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 bridesmaids who took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish, and 5 were wise. The 5 who were foolish did not take enough olive oil for their lamps, but the other 5 were wise enough to take along extra oil. When the bridegroom was delayed, they all became drowsy and fell asleep. At midnight, they were roused by the shout, "Look, the bridegroom is coming! Come out and meet him." All the bridesmaids got up and prepared their lamps. Then the 5 foolish ones asked the others, "Please give us some of your oil because our lamps are going out." But the others replied, "We don't have enough for all of us. Go to a shop and buy some for yourselves." But while they were gone to buy oil, the bridegroom came. Then those who were ready went in with him to the marriage feast, and the door was locked. Later, when the other 5 bridesmaids returned, they stood outside calling, "Lord, Lord, open the door for us." But he called back, "Believe me, I do not know you. So you too must keep watch, for you do not know the day or hour of my return." Next one. There you go. The parable of the 3 servants. Again, the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by the story of a man going on a long trip. He called together his servants and entrusted his money to them. While he was gone, he gave 5 bags of silver to one, 2 bags of silver to another, and 1 bag of silver to the last, dividing it in proportion to their abilities. He then left on his trip. The servant who received the 5 bags of silver began to invest the money and earned 5 more. The servant with 2 bags of silver also went to work and earned 2 more. But the servant who received the 1 bag of silver dug a hole in the ground and hid the master's money. After a long time, their master returned from his trip and called them to give an account of how they had used his money. The servant to whom he had entrusted the 5 bags of silver came forward with 5 more and said, "Master, you gave me 5 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 5 more." The master was full of praise. "Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together." Now, this one here means that we are to use our time, our talents, and treasures diligently in order to serve God completely in whatever we do. In case some people don't know what this parable means. Okay, let's continue. The servant who had received the 2 bags of silver came forward and said, "Master, you gave me 2 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 2 more." The master said, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together." Then the servant with the 1 bag of silver came and said, Master, I knew you were a harsh man, harvesting crops you did not plant and gathering crops you did not cultivate. I was afraid I would lose your money, so I hid it in the earth. Look, here is your money back. But the master replied, You wicked and lazy servant, if you knew I harvested crops I did not plant and gathered crops I did not cultivate, why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? At least I could have gotten some interest on it. Then he ordered, Take the money from this servant and give it to the one with the 10 bags of silver. To those who use well what they're given, even more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who do nothing, even what little they have will be taken away. Now throw this useless servant into outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. This last man hoped to play it safe and protect himself from his master. He was thinking only of himself and was judged for his self-centeredness. Okay. But when the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit upon his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered in his presence, and he will separate the people as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. Excuse me. He will place the sheep at his right hand and the goats at his left. Now, this parable describes the consequences of 2 attitudes towards Jesus' return. Hold on. Let me get a drink of water, please. Hold on. Okay, thank you. Okay, now I was saying that this parable, a couple of things about both of these. The parable, this one describes the consequences of 2 attitudes towards Jesus' return. The person who diligently prepares for it by investing his or her time and talents, to serve God will be rewarded. The person who has no heart for the work of the kingdom will be punished. God rewards faithfulness. Those who bear no fruit for God's kingdom cannot expect to be treated the same as those who are faithful. Now, the one that we're reading now about the sheep and the goats, God will separate his obedient followers from pretenders and unbelievers. We demonstrate what we believe in the way that we act, plain and simple. Now we can read it. Let me go back, in fact, to start this again. This is a very good parable. But when the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit upon his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered in his presence, and he will separate the people as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will place the sheep at his right hand and the goats at his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me into your home. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you cared for me. I was in prison, and you visited me. Then these righteous ones will reply, Lord, when did we ever see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink, or a stranger and show you hospitality, or naked and give you clothing? When did we ever see you sick or in prison and visit you? And the king will say, I tell you the truth. When you did it for the one of the least of these my brothers and sisters, you were doing it to me. Then the king would turn to those on the left and say, Away with you, you cursed ones, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his demons. For I was hungry, and you didn't feed me. I was thirsty, and you didn't give me a drink. I was a stranger, and you didn't invite me into your home. I was naked, and you didn't give me clothing. I was sick and in prison, and you didn't visit me.' Then they will reply, 'Lord, when did we ever see you hungry or thirsty or stranger or naked or sick or in prison and not help you?' And then he will answer, 'I tell you the truth, when you refused to help the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were refusing to help me.' And then they will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous will go into eternal life." Amen. Amen. Okay, we're going to go to chapter 26 here. Let me see here. Okay. Let me get my notes ready here. Thank you. Thank you for your patience. Okay. So here we go. Chapter 26. When Jesus had finished saying all these things, he said to his disciples, "As you know, Passover begins in 2 days, and the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified." At the same time, the leading priests and elders were meeting at the residence of Caiaphas, the high priest, plotting how to capture Jesus secretly and destroy him. But not during the Passover celebration, they agreed, or the people may riot. Jesus anointed at Bethany. Now, this following story, let's clear something up here real quick. It's a matter of chronological order. Matthew and Mark put this event just before the Last Supper, while John has it before the triumphant entry. Of the three, John places this event in the most likely chronological order. We must remember that the main purpose of the gospel writers was to give an accurate record of Jesus' message, not to present a chronological account of his life. So now we can continue here. Let me see here. Amen. Jesus anointed at Bethany. Meanwhile, Jesus was in Bethany at the home of Simon, a man who had previously had leprosy. While he was eating, now remember, this is the home of Mary, Martha, this guy Simon, who was a leper, and also Lazarus. That was in Bethany. All right, now we can continue. While he was eating, a woman came in with a beautiful alabaster jar of expensive perfume and poured it over his head. The disciples were indignant when they saw this. "What a waste," they said. "It could have been sold for a high price and the money given to the poor." But Jesus, aware of this, replied, "Why criticize this woman for doing such a good thing to me? You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me. She has poured this perfume on me to prepare my body for burial. I tell you the truth. Wherever the good news is preached throughout the world, this woman's deed will be remembered and discussed." Then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12 disciples, went to the leading priests and asked, "How much will you pay me to betray Jesus to you?" And they gave him 30 pieces of silver. From that time on, Judas began looking for an opportunity to betray Jesus. Now, we are indebted to Mark and John for many of the details of this story right over here. Details that Matthew chose to omit, to leave out, in other words. Basically, we know that Jesus dined in the home of Simon the leper, along with his friends Mary, Martha, and their brother Lazarus. Jesus had recently raised Lazarus from the dead. So both Mary and Martha must have been filled with a profound sense of awe, right? So grateful was Mary that she took an alabaster jar of costly oil of something called spikenard. She broke the flask and anointed Jesus' head and feet with the oil. Mark indicates, the Gospel of Mark, that the value of the oil exceeds a whole year's wages. And this does not include the price of the shattered jar, by the way. Now, also, by the way, it might interest you to note that out of the four gospel writers, only Matthew specifically states that Judas was paid 30 pieces of silver, which technically was the price of a slave. Leave it to the tax collector to know the exact amount that Judas was paid. Okay, now, let me see here. What's going to be next? Okay. We're going to compare a couple of things here in a second. I'm going to break out the other Bible I have. Hold on a second, please. We're going to compare a few different scriptures when we come to the next part here. Okay, let's continue. On the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Where do you want us to prepare the Passover meal for you?" Jesus said, "As you go into the city, you will see a certain man. Tell him, 'The teacher says, my time has come, and I will eat the Passover meal with my disciples at your house.'" So the disciples did as Jesus told them and prepared the Passover meal there. Okay, let me make sure. Okay, let me read you a couple of scriptures. We're going to go to Mark, first of all, just to compare a couple of things. Mark chapter 14, I think it's verse 13, but chapter 14. Yeah, here we go. Chapter 14. Now, let me go over all three, okay? There's a little minor difference here. I want to see if you guys can catch it, but don't worry, I'll tell you what it is when we're done right now. Okay. Jesus said, "As you go into the city, you will see a certain man." That's all it says, right? A certain man. Tell him, "The teacher says, my time has come, and I will eat the Passover meal with my disciples at your house." Right? Now, when we go to the Gospel of Mark, there's a chapter 14, okay? Chapter 14. We're going to go, here we go. 13. Notice a little slight little difference here. So he sent out two of his disciples. He told them, "Go into the city. A man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him. He will enter a house. Say to its owner, 'The teacher asks, where is my guest room where I can eat the Passover meal with my disciples?'" You notice what the man is doing here? The man is carrying a jar of water. Remember that point just for a second. Let's go to Luke. Luke 22. Yes, it's 22 or 23. I think it's 22. Here we go, 22. I'm pretty sure it's 20. Yes, it is. Okay. Here's Luke chapter 22, verse 10. "When you enter the city, a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him to the house he enters." Right? So, what's the big deal about this man? What is the big deal? We got to shake that apple tree, remember, and get some more fruit. So what is the big deal? The man carrying the jar of water stood out to Peter and John because, let us put this in as delicately as we can. In biblical times, carrying water was a woman's work. At the time of the Gospels, the Essene quarter of Jerusalem was located in the southwest corner of the city. Now, not that it matters, but the Essene gate has been excavated. Now, given their commitment to celibacy, only men lived in this quarter. Some have speculated that Jesus and the disciples shared the Passover meal in an upper room of a home in the Essene Quarter. Not that it matters, but this might explain why a man and not a woman will be carrying the water. Today, the traditional site of the upper room is located in what would have been the Essene Quarter of Jesus' day. But it's interesting because on the other two Gospels, Mark and Luke, it says the man was going to be carrying some water. And to those people in those days, a man carrying water was not a normal thing to see. So that it was very easy to distinguish this man. Okay, so now we can continue, I believe. Let me turn my page. Okay, here we go. When it was evening, Jesus sat down at the table with the 12. While they were eating, he said, I tell you the truth, one of you will betray me. Greatly distressed, each one asked in turn, Am I the one, Lord? He replied, One of you who has just eaten from this bowl with me will betray me. For the Son of Man must pass away, as the Scriptures declared long ago. But how terrible it'll be for the one who betrays him. It would be far better for that man if he had never been born. Judas, the one who would betray him, also asked, Rabbi, am I the one? And Jesus told him, You have said it. As they were eating, Jesus took some bread and blessed it. Then he broke it in pieces and gave it to the disciples, saying, Take this and eat it, for this is my body. Now, several names are used to describe this sacrament, the one we're reading now, and each one brings out a different dimension of it. It is the Lord's Supper because it commemorates the Passover meal that Jesus ate with his disciples, right? Also, it is the Eucharist, which means thanksgiving, because in it we thank God for Jesus' work for us. Third, it is communion because through it we commune with God and with other believers. As we eat the bread and drink the wine, we should be quietly reflective as we recall Jesus' death and promise to come again. Grateful for God's wonderful gift to us and joyful we meet with Christ in the body of believers. Okay. And he took the cup of wine and gave thanks to God for it. He gave it to them and said, Each of you drink from it, for this is my blood, which confirms the covenant between God and his people. It is poured out as a sacrifice to forgive the sins of many. Mark my words, I will not drink wine again until the day I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. Then they sang a hymn and went out to the Mount of Olives. On the way, Jesus told them, Tonight all of you will desert me, for the Scriptures say, God will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have been raised from the dead, I will go ahead of you to Galilee and meet you there. Peter declared, Even if everyone else deserts you, I will never desert you. Jesus replied, I tell you the truth, Peter. This very night, before the rooster crows, you will deny 3 times that you even know me. No, Peter insisted. Even if I have to pass away with you, I will never deny you. And all the other disciples vowed the same. Okay, now, all the disciples, remember, declared that they would pass away before denying Jesus. A few hours later, however, they all scattered. In other words, talk is cheap. Talk is cheap. We can easily affirm our devotion to Jesus, but our claims are meaningful only when they are tested in the crucible of adversity. Okay, now we can continue to verse 36. Let me see something here. Want to make sure I have my notes ready here for the next couple of parts here. Hold on, please. All right. Okay, so let's see here. 35. Yeah, everything's good so far. Jesus prays in Gethsemane. Then Jesus went with them to the olive grove called Gethsemane, and he said, "Sit here while I go over there to pray." He took Peter and Zebedee's two sons, James and John, and he became anguished and distressed. He told them, "My soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." He went on a little farther and bowed with his face to the ground, praying, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup of suffering be taken away from me. Yet I want your will to be done, not mine." Then he returned to the disciples and found them asleep. He said to Peter, "Couldn't you watch with me even 1 hour? Keep watch and pray so that you will not give in to temptation. For the spirit is willing, but the body is weak." Then Jesus left them a second time and prayed, "My Father, if this cup cannot be taken away unless I drink it, your will be done." When he returned to them again, he found them sleeping, for they could not keep their eyes open. So he went to pray a third time, saying the same things again. Then he came to the disciples and said, "Go ahead and sleep. Have your rest. But look, the time has come. The Son of Man is betrayed unto the hands of sinners. Up, let's be going. Look, my betrayer is here." All right. And even as Jesus said this, Judas, one of the 12 disciples, arrived with a crowd of men, armed with swords and clubs. Okay, hold on, please. There you go. They had been sent by the leading priests and elders of the people. The traitor Judas had given them a prearranged signal. "You will know which one to arrest when I greet him with a kiss." So Judas came straight to Jesus. "Greetings, Rabbi," he exclaimed, and gave him the kiss. Jesus said, "My friend, go ahead and do what you have come for." Then the others grabbed Jesus and arrested him. But one of the men with Jesus pulled out his sword and struck the high priest's slave, slashing out his ear. "Put away your sword," Jesus told him. "Those who use the sword will die by the sword. Don't you realize that I could ask my Father for thousands of angels to protect us, and he would send them instantly? But if I did, how would the scriptures be fulfilled that describe what must happen now?" Then Jesus said to the crowd, "Am I some dangerous revolutionary that you come with me with swords and clubs to arrest me? Why didn't you arrest me in the temple? I was there teaching every day. But this is all happening to fulfill the words of the prophets as recorded in the scriptures." At that point, all the disciples deserted him and fled. That's what the Lord had described before. Now, the man who cut off the servant's ear was Peter. That's in John chapter 18, verse 10. Peter was trying to prevent what he saw as defeat. He didn't realize that Jesus had to die in order to gain victory. Now, it records in Luke chapter 22, verse 51, that Jesus touched the servant's ear and he healed him, in case you guys were wondering. And then a few hours earlier, this band of men had said that they would rather pass away than desert him, and they ended up scattering. All right, let's see here. Let's continue. Then the people who had arrested Jesus led him to the home of Caiaphas, the high priest, where the teachers of religious law and the elders had gathered. Meanwhile, Peter followed him at a distance and came to the high priest's courtyard. He went in and sat with the guards and waited to see how it would all end. Inside, the leading priests and the entire high council were trying to find witnesses who would lie about Jesus so they could put him to death. But even though they found many who agreed to give false witness, they could not use anyone's testimony. Finally, 2 men came forward who declared, "This man said, I'm able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days." Then the high priest stood up and said to Jesus, "Well, aren't you going to answer these charges? What do you have to say for yourself?" But Jesus remained silent. Then the high priest said to him, "I demand in the name of the living God, tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God." Jesus replied, "You have said it, and in the future you will see the Son of Man seated in the place of power at God's right hand, and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his clothing to show his horror and said, "Blasphemy! Why do we need other witnesses? You have all heard his blasphemy. What is your verdict?" There we go. "Guilty," they shouted. "He deserves to die." Then they began to spit in Jesus' face and beat him with their fists. And some slapped him, jeering, "Prophesy to us, you Messiah. Who hit you that time?" So, it gets pretty bad right there, but there's a couple of things I want to share with you here. Now, the Sanhedrin, I don't know if you guys heard, it's like the Jewish Supreme Court. They decreed with one voice that Jesus deserved to die. In their bones, they knew Jesus to be an innocent man. I mean, they knew that. They knew that the entire proceeding was illegal under their own laws. I mean, they were doing this in the middle of the night, They knew that the charges against Jesus were trumped up. All the council sought false testimony against Jesus to put him to death. We read that in verse 59. Yet they knew, and yet these men of such high moral character stooped so low as to play a little guessing game with Jesus as they covered his eyes, repeatedly slapping him in the face and taunting him to tell them who hit him that time. I mean, it was a horrible situation. Okay, now, something interesting we're going to read right now that I don't know if you guys ever thought about. Let's read from 69 all the way to 75. Meanwhile, Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard. A servant girl came over and said to him, "You were one of those with Jesus the Galilean." But Peter denied it in front of everyone. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. Later out by the gate, another servant girl noticed him and said to those standing around, "This man was with Jesus of Nazareth." And again Peter denied it, this time with an oath. "I don't even know the man," he said. A little later, some of the other bystanders came over to Peter and said, "You must be one of them. We can tell by your Galilean accent." Peter swore, "A curse on me if I'm lying. I don't know the man." And immediately the rooster crowed. Suddenly, Jesus' words flashed through Peter's mind. "Before the rooster crows, you will deny 3 times that you even know me." And he went away weeping bitterly. Now, this will be interesting, I hope, because if anybody reads these accounts of what happened, right, when after Jesus was tried by the Sanhedrin, by the teachers of religious law, all these people in a kangaroo court, if you will, there is something that sticks out after a while. There is a time gap in the record between the time the Sanhedrin sentenced Jesus to die in the late evening and his trial before Pilate in the morning, which would be in the beginning of the next chapter, in the morning. So what happened between late evening and early morning? During the gap, a couple notable events took place. First of all, Peter, who had been following the proceedings from afar, joined Jesus' accusers in the courtyard outside of the high priest's home. Remember? It was there that Peter was asked 3 times if he was one of Jesus' disciples. And 3 out of 3, Peter denied even knowing him. Second, Jesus had to be held somewhere for the night before facing Pilate in the morning, right? He had to be somewhere. It is interesting to note that the trial before the Sanhedrin was patently illegal. I told you this earlier. Capital cases required public trials during the day at the temple. But when you're destroying the Son of God, who cares about trivial details of the law, right? That's what they figured. So the Jewish court condemned Jesus to die at night and then had to figure out where to hold him in custody until the morning. Where did they put him? And once again, we can thank the archaeologists for the answer. Let me explain. The high priest's house has been excavated, including the courtyard where Peter sat in cozy and close proximity to Jesus as judges and jury. He was warming himself with those self-righteous and self-serving men. You'll never believe what they found under the house when they excavated it. They found a small little jail, a prison. The rock-cut chambers were the prison associated with the palace. The upper chamber, it is suggested, was a guard chamber, and the rings in the walls were used to tie prisoners for flagellation, to be whipped, with a scourged is another term. The lower pit was the place of incarceration, and the aperture, this is interesting, the little aperture in the wall allowed the guards to watch those below. That Christ himself was confined here during the night of his trial before Caiaphas is also then recognized. Now here's something a little bit eerie. Through the opening, Jesus could easily have heard the rooster crow for the 3rd time, stared into eyes of Peter, and watched him rush away as he went out to weep bitter tears, having just denied and disowned the one he swore to defend, even to the end. So in other words, Jesus was confined to a small little jail cell underneath that building. And that little building underneath the jail cell had a little window where he actually could see Peter denying him 3 times. It was just a sobering thought to know, because some people say, well, where did Jesus go for 3 or 4 or 5 hours? He was confined in a little cell.